Hello, I'm Gretchen Sabel, and I'm president of League of Women Voters ABC. That's Anoka, Blaine, Coon Rapids area, but we actually serve all of Anoka County, plus a little bit of the northern Hennepin County, Champlin and Dayton. League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. We do not back specific candidates, but we do take positions on issues. We like to work to make sure that there's free and fair voting and that people get to express themselves and learn about the issues. So that's kind of what we're about, voter education. Today we're going to focus on the question of how do you run an election in time of COVID? It's a topic that we're hearing about in the news all the time. And with us today, we have two Minnesota state senators who I'll introduce in a minute. As we watched the problems that our friends to the east had in Wisconsin, they're up to 52 cases of COVID now tied to their recent elections there. And that's a troubling thing. We just saw the Ohio election just happened where they shifted it all to mail and voter turnout was very low because of the last minute efforts there. So I think that there's a lot that we can do and need to do in Minnesota to make sure that our 2020 elections are good, that everybody gets to participate in a fair way and that people vote that deserve to vote and not that don't deserve to vote. So there's a lot of things to balance out there. So we're going to start off. I'll introduce Senator Benson. Senator Michelle Benson is from the Ham Lake area, District 31, and she's going to talk a little bit, and then we'll talk to Senator Laine after that. Senator Benson?
Well, briefly, Michelle Benson, I was elected in 2010. Served my first term in 2011. I currently chair the Health and Human Services Finance and Policy Committee and serve as Deputy Majority Leader. And that is one of the reasons that I wanted to make sure that I participate with the League of Women Voters to make sure that people know our caucus is interested in election integrity and participating in community outreach for voters. And because I'm on a health committee, I spend all of my time now thinking about COVID and how we can operate safely, whether it is how we manage elective procedures, how can we safely open our businesses, how can people be in community, how do we protect people in long-term care settings. And so there will be some nexus between the election and in particular long-term care facilities and making sure the vulnerable have options for exercising their franchise.
Thank you. Now Senator Laine is with us. She's from Columbia Heights, is it?
Yes.
And she's District 41.
Yes, thank you.
Go ahead.
I serve Columbia Heights, Fridley, St. Anthony, New Brighton, and a little of Spring Lake Park, and I always say don't forget Hilltop in there. And I was elected in 2010 to the House of Representatives, and then in 2016 I moved to the Senate. And I am Assistant Minority Leader in the Senate on state government and local government and bonding. And I've been involved in elections both in the House and the Senate. It seems I really enjoy working with the Campaign Finance Board, and I really enjoy working with the Secretary of State. So those have been a key interest of mine.
Thank you. So I have the number of questions that I did send to the senators in advance so they've got a chance to practice. But first I want to talk a little bit about what the difference is. So in Minnesota, we are able to request a ballot by mail. You fill out a thing online or you send it, you request it through a form and it's mailed to you wherever you are, and then you mail it back with your voted ballot. Or you can register to vote as part of that process too. So we call that no excuse absentee voting, and it's open to anybody in Minnesota that's eligible to vote. And the other kind of way that people would vote in this COVID scenario would be vote by mail. And the difference between those two is that everybody that's a registered voter would automatically be sent a ballot. So that you eliminate that step of the voter having to apply for a ballot, and it's in a way more efficient. There's less paper handling back and forth, and so there's concerns about security with that many ballots just going out to people that may not be expecting them or may not be home or whatever. So there's questions with that too. So that's the two things. So our first question then, vote by mail has been praised not only by the Minnesota Secretary of State, Steve Simon, but also by Republican Secretaries of State in Washington, Oregon, and Ohio as a temporary solution for reducing infection during voting. A recent poll by Public Policy Polling found that 63% of Minnesota voters approved of a plan for Minnesota to use vote by mail, while only 26% of the voters disapproved. Do you support vote by mail? Why or why not? And we'll start with Senator Benson.
And let's be cautious about polls until I see how the question was actually asked and were the voters informed that we have the no excuse absentee process that actually opens, I believe it's May 13th. You can actually begin the process of requesting your absentee ballot, both for the primary and for the general election. And so until I know if they were actually informed of that, many of them might have actually used that process and therefore think it's vote by mail and seem supportive. And so until we see some more detail, polls can be tricky things and not always the best guide to what voters actually believe. So I think because we have the no excuse absentee process, and we've been really good at doing that, I'm hesitant to mail out ballots to an address of record when the US Census tells us that 11% of the population moves regularly, especially young people are more inclined to move address to address. We do have townships and small communities that are permitted to do vote by mail. That's because it's hard to set up a polling place in a township that has 20 people. How do you set up a polling place just for those 20 people? But we also know that those 20 people probably don't move. And so there's very low risk that someone else would receive their ballot and turn it in on their behalf. So given how broadly our no excuse absentee process is available to Minnesotans and the risk of transient populations and ballot misappropriation, I think we actually have a pretty good sweet spot for how we're going to get ballots to people in a safe way. I think something we do need to talk about is how we make polling locations safe. So if we're going to have a polling location traditionally in a long-term care facility or nursing home, let's find a safe place to have that so we don't have people coming into a facility that should remain well sheltered. And by the time we get to November, we'll be at the beginning of influenza season again. And so maybe long-term, we should consider the wisdom of having polling places in an elder care facility or in a long-term care facility, because even influenza, as we know, can be very dangerous to that population.
Senator Laine?
Yes, in general, I think we should switch to a mail-in balloting, but my understanding is that takes a little bit of time to actually organize it across the state. And most of the states, the 5 states that are doing it now, Oregon and Washington and Colorado and Hawaii and now Utah, they spent some time letting counties do it by choice, one by one, as they chose to do it, and building the infrastructure and the understanding, both in the people and in the at the county level. So I don't know how Ohio is going to do it so quickly. It seems to me that it's really a stretch. And as Michelle said, we do have the no excuse absentee ballots to get us by now. But I would like to see it eventually moved on. And I do agree that, and I know that Secretary of State is working on the statewide voter registration system now through some of the HAVA funds he has. We need that very accurate if we're going to be sending out ballots. And as Michelle said, the people moving, Columbia Heights has had a huge turnover as older people have left and younger people have now bought these houses because it's right for what they can afford, and it's just so many young people moving into Columbia Heights. I love it. But over the last few years, I think it's a 50% turnover. It's just enormous, and that's since the last presidential. So it would be interesting to have to deal with all this right now.
A question I didn't give you in advance, but wouldn't it take more money to do something like that? Even if we'd stick with our current, no excuse absentee ballot voting, it's going to mean a lot more mail for the counties or the election administrators. I guess it's usually the counties that would pay that then.
Yeah, the counties do the work. The
Yeah.
counties always do the work. The Secretary of State basically supervises it. So the counties would need more money and more staff to handle it, and they're going to need it now for the absentee process, because in the past we had more people loving. In 2016, more people used absentee ballot because it went to no excuse, and we anticipated that 30% of people are going to use absentee ballots even before the pandemic hit. So if it's now, more people are going to. So we're going to have a lot of people using the absentee process, and the counties are not set up for that much influx. They don't have enough time to deal with the influx, and the time we give them is not sufficient. So they need more time to do that and more money to get more staff.
Senator Benson, did you have anything to say about them?
No, I am concerned. I share Senator Laine's concern about the county's ability, even with current absentee ballot process. This was something they raised, getting it done in the 7-day requirement for certification.
Yeah.
Was something that they had raised, and wanted to make sure that in this process we don't lose sight of the deliverable, which is a certified, trusted election. And that 7-day window might be tight if we do any more absentee ballots than our system's adjusted to.
I know I've worked as an absentee ballot qualifier, or whatever you call that, and it was a lot of work in a short period of time, so that was pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm.
My question too, Minnesota Statute 204B.45 allows townships and small cities outside the metro area to determine whether to conduct their election via mail balloting. If the legislature doesn't approve mail balloting for the whole state, could this be modified so that every city and township could be afforded the same opportunity to decide whether mail balloting is best for them? And if not permanently, at least for 2020. You want to start with Senator Laine on that one, and we'll.
Yeah, and as I said, I think it's a big stretch to do it now in this short period of time, but this is the way that you start a process like this. You start with counties choosing to advance to it, and we already allow a lot of our smaller cities and townships to do it, and they love it. They just assume that it's natural. And that's another thing. Polls, as you can trust them, as much as you can trust them, show that once people are doing mail-in ballots, they just 80% more just absolutely think that they would never go back to anything else. So our smaller cities and townships are doing it. Why can't we expand that option to other counties and cities to consider it for their local elections? And that's a good way to build the understanding in both the people and in the infrastructure. So I would definitely support that, but not necessarily right now for 2020. I think that's what we should do in the long run.
Senator Benson?
And I think making changes right now is not prudent. The Summit County metro area has pretty good population density, so I would have to evaluate if there was anywhere that didn't have enough density that it could mirror some of the smaller, less dense townships where mail-in balloting works so well. And so let's look at density differences, a significant factor in why mail-in balloting is a viable option versus setting up a polling place and having time-specific absentee ballots and in person. I think it's a density question rather than, and now that we have no excuse absentee, rather than sort of special treatment. These very sparsely populated townships would make no sense to put up a polling location. So.
Mm-hmm. I will say my daughter lives in northern Minnesota, and they always voted at town hall until it burned down, and now they've just shifted to mail-in ballots. So it works for them. If in-person voting is still taking place on election day, what steps should the state take to ensure the safety of election judges and to reduce the risk of spread of coronavirus? That would be Senator Benson first.
So I know Senator Kiffmeyer is working even today, and we're hoping to have language very soon to move that the voting funds for related to COVID, so that we could do special training of election judges. I talked to a small manufacturer today who's actually building plexiglass shields for the Tavern Society in Wisconsin. And I said, well, and I happened to be preparing for this. I said, So what if we had them for tables for election judges, because there's a little slot in the front, you know, so those kinds of things could be purchased with this money. If somebody wants single-use pens, okay, let's just buy enough pens so that everybody just uses one and takes it with them, so we don't have to worry about viral transmission, those kinds of things. Masks for, and proper masks for election judges. Even things like, I know the election judges nearest my home, one of the highlights of their day is everybody brings their home cooked meal. Well,
Yeah.
maybe in this case, we have delivery of a single serve meal so that people don't have to worry about cross-contamination with utensils. And we know that COVID's not a foodborne illness, but touching utensils where you would scoop up a hot dish. So I think our election judges can come up with some really good ideas. Our local election officials can get some best practices that can be developed in conjunction with the Minnesota Department of Health. That's what this money is for, so let's make sure it's available.
Thank you. Senator Laine?
Yes, and besides the operation at the polling place with some kind of plexiglass protection of some sort, or and configuring it different so that people are further apart. And I hope that the election judges could have actually the N95 masks for their own protection. But besides that, we will have a problem because we won't have as many election judges who are usually retired folks wanting to be election judges this time. It is a major problem. And if you don't have enough election judges, then instead of expanding polling places so that you can actually have less at each polling place, you actually end up consolidating them, which is what happened in Wisconsin. They went, I think Milwaukee went from 170 polling places to 5. And Green Bay went from 30 polling places to 3. How can you have 10,000 people trying to vote at one polling place? It's just not possible. So we need to move now on how we can get perhaps college students involved and find them and then train them. Again, we're up against a big timeline here. It's August for the primary. It's just coming up. So we need to attend to election judges themselves, and we need to attend to keeping everybody safe at the place. And also we need to look at where we're going to have the locales, because right now we have them at some assisted living places, and we have them at some over 55 apartment building places, and we need to stop that. We need to find other places, and we need to do it now. But we also have to change the law to do that, because our law says that the counties have to choose their polling places by December 31st of the previous year. So that date has already passed. So we need to allow them to get up and running perhaps by July 1st is the suggestion in legislation. None of this legislation is passed yet, so we've got to get a move on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to I want to take a moment. The N95 masks are a really specialized mask, and I sometimes see people wearing them in public. They're meant to be sort of vacuum fitted to your face, and they're not recommended for everybody. So I have been advocating that people look at the CDC guidelines and use what is necessary. I think masks are an excellent protective tool, but I do know that sometimes if you have COPD and you wear a well-fitted N95 mask, it can aggravate your ability to breathe. And so I completely agree with Senator Laine. We need to make sure they have the right equipment. But let's make sure we get them the right equipment and have health professionals nearby to help them make good decisions. Maybe we take temperatures of people coming into the polling places. It's not that we want to reject them, but we want them to be aware, and maybe have them step aside and do a little extra spacing and caregiving. So I appreciate the thoughtfulness that Senator Laine is using as she approaches this issue.
If I could just respond to the regarding the N95s, yes, we have been suggesting that they be used for healthcare workers because we've had a limited number, and we use the other masks, more like surgical masks, for the purpose of protecting if you're ill from getting your breath out there for others or sneeze out there for others. But they are not meant for protecting the person. And if somebody's coming into a polling place, they should be required to have one of those masks on to protect anything from them for going further out. But election workers who are there all day and into the night, exposed to everybody who comes in, I say that they need the kind of mask that protects them from the virus. And N95 means that 95% of the tiny, tiny, tiny little microbes do not enter that mask. And I think that we need to do that, take the money that we have from HAVA and equip the poll workers themselves to protect them.
And if we're going to do that, then I would want there to be a healthcare worker there to help them properly fit it, and to make sure that it's not going to aggravate asthma or COPD or any other sort of lung condition, because sometimes if you get that seal tight, it can be a little tough to breathe. And if you don't have the seal tight, it's not stopping the virus. So we're going to give them specialized equipment, then let's support them with the specialized people to help them use it properly. And that, I think, would be a worthy expense.
And that would go into who we ask to be election judges also.
Yeah.
Make sure they can handle that.
One of the things that League of Women Voters is doing is we've started an intern program where we call them fellows in a number of different high schools, and we're hoping to be able to recruit people from that cadre as well to be election judges. Because if you're 16 and over, you can be at least an assistant election judge, which would help quite a bit to have more people involved that way. So we're trying to. So when I asked our state league for a question, they said, "Oh, find out how they feel about House File 3499."
It's actually approaching the things that we have been talking about here. Some of the things we want about polling places, about expanding the date to find a new polling place, just doing some of the things that we have been talking about, and releasing the HAVA funds so that we can use them to do this stuff. We have HAVA funds, Help America Vote Act funds specifically for COVID, and we have HAVA funds specifically for security and elections, and both of those pockets of funds need to be released. We're only one of 5 states that has to have the legislature authorize federal funds that come in for elections things, and we just need to get that done. So it does that, and it does some of the things that we've been talking about. And the question that is kind of gumming up the works right now is, how long do we give county officials time before and after election to do the absentee voting? Right now in lots, 7 days before the election, they can start tabulating the absentee votes, but that's not going to be enough time at all. I think there's some agreement to have it 14 days before. I'm thinking that that's what we had bipartisan agreement on. And then we have some concern as to whether we could give them some time after the election. Everybody wants the results fast, so nobody wants to mess with that, but people are allowed to get their absentee ballots in right up to postmark on election day. So that means that the counties have to have time to go through those. And if there's a huge influx at that time, they're not going to be able to be done by whatever, midnight. I guess they have 24 hours from the close of election polls to get things done, but they're saying that that won't do it. So they're asking for a minimum of 3 days to finalize that. And we can get an idea of what elections are. Even now, when we get our election results on election night, they're not certified. We know that there will be slight changes in them. There might be a little bit more changes now, but we just need a little bit more time to clean up that process. We don't want a pandemic, a public health crisis, and we don't want an election crisis. We want people to be able to trust the process and to get everybody's vote counted. And that's all what's in the bill.
Senator Benson, do you want to talk about House File 3499 at all?
I know Senator Kiffmeyer is working off of a different, off of a Senate file, different language. They'll eventually get things matched up, but I think in the next week or so, we're going to see language. And I believe she's been working closely with the House. From what I hear, this is as close as we've been on an election bill at this point in time, in a very, very long time. And so I have a lot of hope that the good ideas that we've talked about here today and the necessary things, moving polling places out of nursing homes, making sure counties have adequate resources, keeping election judges safe, that those will be in that bill.
So you're both confident then that a bill will pass in time and we'll be able to know what we're doing by the time the session's over?
I would say yes, since we have about 3 weeks, and right now we're in the grunting and groaning about it.
Yeah, there'll be something. I haven't seen final language yet, so I can't tell you how easy or difficult it will be to get it moved, but there will be. Senator Kiffmeyer, who is our elections lead, is very committed to having bipartisan election bills pass so that people trust our elections process. And sometimes you start out partisan and you meet the other body halfway, and that's how you end up with a bipartisan bill. So I'm looking forward to seeing that language here in the next several days, if not by the end of next week.
Well, good. Well, thank you very much then. I think we'll just wrap up now, if that's okay with you guys. And thank you very much for being part of this. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us.
Important topic.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.